the sake of everybody else. Cool. Today we are going to cover the brain. We're going to start actually the lecture on the brain. It's going to be today and next week. I wanted to let you guys know I have updated the syllabus in there as well too. The main update to it is that there is no schedule on that, but that does suffice as the main thing. But primarily, each section that is part of everything will be we're covering like basically a week of that. So, what is going to be the next week? I'm trying to remember we'll deal with that next week. But today we're talking about the brain specifically. I have a couple other resources available to you guys as well associated with this. Under class meetings, the brain, and we have the basically this was something to cover for you guys to go and look at this today. Here are the lecture slides that I'm going to be covering, as well as in case your trigger is tripped and you really want to go into massive great detail on this, feel free to jump on any of these videos. I'll actually show these two in class today too. But these things are just fantastic resources to just get a little bit more of a bite into it. If you want to ask any other questions after class, during class, things like that, please jump in because this is going to feel very anatomy and physiology like. However, once we get finished with the basis of talking about the brain, every other lecture that we'll have will somehow connect to how the brain actually functions or dysfunctions to get us to either versions of illness, mental health, or how we work socially. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Woohoo! Okay, I'm gonna pull up this bad boy. Cool. So I am using the textbook from the slides from my other class. Not to say that you have to perfectly memorize anything that's here. More so, I would let every single bit of this stuff wash over you and ask a whole bunch of questions. So if something seems a bit weird, that's cool too. Um, I just want to get you kind of into this. We're going to go way more detailed than anything you'll ever have to really know. The questions for this, again, there'll be 5 questions. They are not massively detailed, I promise. But let's start with neuroscience and behavior associated with the brain. So the first things we're going to kind of cover overall are neurons. We're also going to talk about the electrochemical actions of the neurons, so meaning literally from a physics and neurochemical perspective, what happens inside the brain. Talk about the organization and structure of the brain. Then we're going to get into what genes are and how we actually continue to study these concepts. So this is the gist of for the next 2 weeks. Again, ask questions. Even just stop me for a moment if you find something that's like, well, wait a second, what does that mean? Totally cool. So the first thing we're going to talk about is neurons. These are what neurons look like, and they're the cells basically inside the brain. Just like any cell, they have a cell wall. They have nucleus, mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Everybody will remember that if they took anatomy and physiology. But neurons help us with processing all thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. We do not just have neurons inside of our brain, we have them throughout every single part of our body. We have some type of nerve. Surprisingly, also, too, we have the majority of all of our nerves are actually in our intestines. And I'll go through that a little bit later about the enteric nervous system. But we take in information and we put out information. That's what neurons actually will do for us. Again, we have a cell body. There's things called a dendrite, which is what receives the information. It's the little finger things out from that. The synapses is where we get the junction between the axon and the neuron, where we get the information or we process out the information, which that's the axon part of it. Additionally, we have a myelin sheath and a glial cell. Now, I know I just threw a bunch of words at you. This is more so what those things tend to look like. So we have the cell itself here. Actually, I'm going to get you a little pointer, laser pointer. Cool. So we have the cell here itself, kind of like any other cell inside the body. We have a nucleus inside that contains the DNA, the chromosomes, all that jazz. And we have the dendrites that stretch out from outside of that. Along those dendrites, we have an axon, which has these long little fiber things that connect over to another set of cells, another dendrite. We have a myelin sheath, which is this little almost like plastic-like covering. It's actually made of fat. And in between, we have these little spots in between. So it's kind of like a friendship bracelet inside of our head. Inside between each nerve cell, we have little receptors and little neurotransmitters that send between the two of them. The thing that absolutely blows my mind, and it blows almost everybody's mind when you really truly think about it, no nerve cells are actually connected to each other. They are actually um, just tiny nanometers away from each other, connecting information through neuroreceptors back and forth. So anytime that we have a thought, anytime we have a physical feeling or something along those lines, like meaning we touch something, never once does the actual nerve touch another nerve. Have you ever heard that before?
Yes, please.
Cool,
No,
cool. Has everybody taken anatomy and physiology, or people have not? I'm just kind of wondering because I want to know how deep to get into this.
No, but I've
I
taken
haven't.
biology.
never.
Right, biology I've taken.
Yeah,
I heard of this
biology
mostly from
is a
biology.
bit, yeah, same.
Never taken it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, this is basically we're pulling out a lot of this information from that world. It does connect. It does matter. So I'll go a lot more into detail about what the neurotransmitters are. But we have different types of neurons that have different functions. We have sensory neurons, and they receive information. We have motor neurons, which carry signals along the spinal cord or muscles to produce movement. So they're the longer part of it. And then we have the inner neurons, which collect sensory information, motor neurons that it gets all the information together that just connect the information. The neurons have different shapes. Purkinje cells inside the cerebellum of the brain are the ones that we tend to think about the most. Now, I know that this kind of looks a little bit, it looks very tree-like, like an upside down tree. In the real world, what that actually will look like, and I have these in here too. I'll see if I can also. This is what Purkinje cells look like inside the body. So inside the brain, we tend to see them look like that too. And that's basically along the inside of what your brain will look like. So those are mostly what we refer to as brain cells. Comparatively, we have hippocampal pyramid brain cells, and those look a lot more like this. So they're kind of like the a root where we've got a bunch of things splitting out with that, and then they have the long connector on top of it. Again, they function a little bit differently, but again, those little things along the edge are called dendrites. So those are some things to look at as well too. Videos will go into a lot more detail if this trips your trigger. But yes, there's a lot of different things as well too. So yeah, we have the dendrites, we have the axon, which is where we're getting a lot of the information, and then sharing it with others. I'll get back into all of this. So there is an electrochemical reaction of how neurons actually will communicate with each other, meaning that we use electricity to get the information from one nerve to another. So we have a conduction and then we have a transmission. And through that said, it's basically electricity. So we have a positive and negative response, just like any other electric thing that goes on. In order to get a piece of information, we have to have the electricity that occurs. Now, with that said, here's a little moment of zen and thought for you. Considering that all neurons have to have an electrical response to actually connect with each other. Anytime that we have a thought, it is something that actually can be measured in millivolts. So it's something that we can measure the amount of thought we have in a concept. So we think we have electricity. One of the first laws of thermodynamics is that energy cannot be lost or gained. So therefore, we have our thought, and that energy cannot be lost or gained. Where does it go? I'd love your thoughts. What happens once we have a thought and we have electricity? What happens to it?
Our
Yeah,
neurons
Nancy.
communicate with each other.
Right? So we can use that to communicate with each other. We can have the action of communication. Nancy, you had
Yeah,
mentioned.
I was just gonna say it could produce like an emotion
Okay.
and have us react a sort of way because it's in our brains.
Okay, so we felt an emotion. Like I'm feeling super, super, super sad. Um, what happens to that emotion after we've felt it? What happens with the electrochemical response of that emotion? I don't directly have an answer for this. I'm wanting to kind of have a little bit of a discussion.
Can you repeat it again?
Yeah, so what happens if I feel sad? I'm actually feeling the emotion of being sad. We know that there's an electrical chemical response that occurs whenever we have that. What happens to the energy of my sadness after I feel that emotion?
You cry.
Okay, so I could have a physiological response. Anything else?
But imagine like the electricity or whatever would like maybe like disappear or get
Okay.
sent to like some like collective place that makes it like, disappear.
And you guys have some great responses. And I love the stores itself. So we have three different things that we've kind of heard here. We could either have it store itself, we could have it we could deal with the entropy concept of the loss of energy through just dispersion, or we could have a physiological response. Now, again, in the physical medicine realm, we tend to say our tissues hold our issues, meaning more than just our brain. You ever notice somebody that says, I'm not stressed, and they've got shoulders as earrings?
Yeah.
We tend to see people that um have certain types of emotions, and the longer amount of time that they feel emotions, it tends to actually show up physiologically on them. So it's something that it's not that it has to stay specifically in the brain. It can connect elsewhere in the body, thus giving a little bit more of an argument for the monoist view of of the fact that we have a brain body connection. So just throwing that part out. Um, in these electric impulses that are occurring, we have the electric charge. We have in each one of them, we have a resting potential. So meaning we're getting back into the physics perspective. The resting potential is the difference between the electric charge inside the cell and outside the cell. And we don't actually send a signal until it reaches a certain threshold of I want to say pressure, but it's not pressure. It's more it's it's the level of electrical impulses. But when you think about it, kind of like a docking system inside the like the Panama Canal, where they raise, they fall once they get to a certain point. That's the type of thing that we're dealing with these. We have a refractory period, so right after the nerve expresses itself electrically, then there's a time where it cannot be initiated again. I mean, we're talking about nanoseconds, but there is a time where the refractory period does occur. We initially found this out when we were studying squids. So squids were a great thing because we were able to see the dendrites, and we were able to artificially send an electric impulse from one side of the squid to the other side of the squid in different parts of the cell. So that's one of the ways that we kind of started doing this. The way that the action potential works with all of these things is that it's just basically like, this is what's referred to as a sine wave. It is an electrical wave. You also could think of this as a sound wave type of circumstance. It's not a sound wave, but sound waves behave in a similar way. We have the resting potential where nothing is actually happening. Then we have the action potential where where we are gathering the information. Then we have the refractory period afterwards. Now you'll notice in here, the really kind of cool thing is, take a look at the Na and the K here. Do you guys remember what those mean from chemistry?
Sodium and
Salt and
potassium.
potassium.
Cool. So, yeah, go on, sorry. Yeah, you just said sodium and potassium. So when we are getting the amount of electricity to send these neurotransmitters back and forth and such, it opens up calcium and potassium channels. And that's what it uses to communicate between each of these different types of cells. What is very interesting to me about that is, do you guys have you ever heard, why does Gatorade taste so good? I guess that's the best way. When you're feeling sick, why does Gatorade taste so good?
The electrolytes.
Right. You ever heard of sodium and calcium being referred to as electrolytes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one of the reasons why sometimes we really desperately need things like artificial electrolytes or more electrolytes put into our body when we're sick is that we have a lack of them. So therefore, we can't really get the connection that we're needing to actually function properly. So it's one of the reasons why our body actually needs salt. It needs potassium. So now I'm not saying that you should go out and just eat bricks of salt, but there are sometimes problems with low salt diets because we can sometimes make it to where we don't get enough salt in our diet and thus cause problems. So have you guys heard that type of thing before?
Yeah.
Cool. Now, again, if we had a situation where we have high blood pressure and we're trying to do a low salt diet, that is definitely different than a no salt diet. Any food that we eat will have some type of salts in them, some type of potassium, some type of trace minerals. So it's something worth at least considering from all those things as well. Cool. Does anybody else want to talk about the electricity side of this? Questions, thoughts?
Question.
Bring it, Cheng.
It's kind of hard for me to see on my end because of the screen, but it says Na, like those are ions, right? I see a
Yes.
minus and a plus.
Yep. Actually, they're both pluses on those, but yes, they are ions. There's a little minus on that one as well too. But yes, we are dealing with ions connecting
Okay.
through the two.
So it goes from resting potential to action potential to refractionary.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's just like a electric wave. That's a little pump. Now, one of the cool things about this too is when we're sending signals between two neurons, it basically is a beep type of sound. And that's a better way of saying the electric thing. It's a bzz type of circumstance. The nerves are capable of telling the difference between a bzz, bzz, and a bzz, 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 bzz type of circumstance. That's how they make a difference they tell the difference between knowing how many of these ions need to be transported in order to connect the thought, action, or any of those other things. So again, it's about the speed by which these things are actually going through. It's very binary, kind of like a computer. It is a domino effect. So the membrane channels for these sodium ions are closed, thus another part opens. It just continues this on and on and on all along just with the dominoes. So we have these long bits of the nerve. In between of them, we have these myelin sheaths, the known nodes of Ranvier or Ranvier, and the axon is what each one of those things are individually called. Those are the long pathways that that information is being sent through to get to the dendrites, which then send it to the axons to be able to communicate to the next nerve. Again, I know this stuff is I'm throwing a lot of words at you. I guarantee you this is not going to be on any specific tests. But we have transmitter buttons, which I'll show you a picture of that in a second, where they're like knob-like structures that connect from an axon, and they connect like that type of thing, where we're sending the neurotransmitters from one side, they're received at the other side, and then that they send out between the two. So here's what they look like inside, and we have a circumstance where we are sending them through. We receive, and then we can reuptake some of these as well. We also have a concept called diffusion, which is where some of those sodium and potassium are actually just going outside of the body that aren't necessary. So that is kind of where we're getting the difference between the two of those. Now, we are going to go into different types of neurotransmitters about this and why certain ones are more effective than others and how the body uses this. And I believe that's, yeah, we've already actually asked that question. So some of the neurotransmitters that you guys probably have heard. Kareem, you're all good, man. We have acetylcholine, dopamine, glutamine, GABA, norepinephrine, serotonin, endorphins. You guys heard of all of these before?
Question.
Sure. What do you got, Cheng?
Glutamate, isn't that like MSG?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Actually, that's monosodium glutamate. Glutamate is one of the neurotransmitters. This one, it's yes, but it's a part of that. And you actually kind of just touched into something that I think is kind of very, very, very interesting about this. Neurotransmitters, our body naturally makes a lot of these things. Some people have very large amounts of issues with monosodium glutamate because it can interfere with our body's natural production of glutamate. So it can be a situation where are either interrupting or creating more of those type of things that are occurring. But very often we just we don't want to have too much of one type of neurotransmitter or too little of a certain type of neurotransmitter, or else we get mental health pathologies. Those are the type of things that happen, as well as other ones throughout the body. These are very similar, and sometimes they actually are hormones, depending how they're functioning. So one of the things that's very interesting about the body just in general is if you mess with one hormone, you mess with all of them. So if you mess with a hormone, you basically are also messing with neurotransmitters. So if we have situations where we're getting artificial hormones, like if we're getting insulin, or if we're getting something that is going to be interfering with glycogenesis, like Ozempic and some of these other ones that are coming in right now, that can actually make it to where we have other issues where we can produce other problems inside the body as well. So it's something worth mentioning in that picture. Because of that, we have an agonists and antagonists. We have specific drugs that can interfere with the neurotransmitters, or they can mimic them themselves. So we have some that can actually increase the action of that. Those are the agonists, and then we have the antagonist ones that block it. Now I guarantee you guys have heard of these different types of medications that are out there, but here are some examples of those type of things. So we have a circumstance where we have an agonist. We have a situation where, well, this drug most likely would be something like Wellbutrin. What it is doing is it is on the reception sites, it's actually making it to where it's easier to activate that transmission between the two. Now you notice here too, it talks about drugs about that such as a nicotine bind. Well, isn't nicotine bad? Haven't you guys heard that nicotine is bad for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a mind blow moment. Did you know your body actually makes nicotine? It's called nicotinic acid. Yep, your brain makes nicotinic acid. It's actually what we use to determine if we are full, if we have eaten enough, if we're physically satiated. So that's one of the reasons why when we have a cigarette, we will have a circumstance where, well, you know what? I'm not that hungry anymore. I feel full. Yep, it kills the appetite. Exactly. So, yeah, it's absolutely crazy on that. There's actually some recent research and some drugs that are being produced right now about using nicotine to actually treat ADHD. Now, I'm by no means am I telling you go out there and get yourself a pack of cigarettes, treat your ADHD that way. Yeah. Aiden, what's your question?
Could okay, I don't know like a lot about like the nicotine industry or whatever, but could you get it in a different way that's not a cigarette? And
Oh, absolutely.
does it still have the like lung cancerous results that way or no?
Yes and no and yes and no and yes and no. Um, one of the big things about the tobacco industry is they add a lot of other horrible, horrible chemicals to it. It is possible to get nicotine from tobacco without getting it specifically from a cigarette or from a cigar or from chew or something like that. In South American cultures, there's you know the medicine man image of like them blowing into your nose and everything?
No.
Okay, well, there's the old image of like the medicine man that you're. I'm gonna get you an image of this because you guys are actually asking an interesting question. Bay, Bay, shaman images. So you've had this type of image. Have you guys ever seen that type of thing?
Yes.
Cool. Well, so what they're actually blowing into this one shaman is blowing into this man's nose. He's using a thing called a tepe. They're blowing a version of tobacco with other medicinal herbs, and it's it's tobacco that's been highly burned, and they're actually blowing the ash of the tobacco into the nose, and it makes you have almost an instantaneous high, and then you just blow it out afterwards. So it's a type of snuff. That is one of the ways that it is treated outside of the Western culture. I'm not saying that this is a very great thing. It's also highly addictive as well too, because again, anytime you're using nicotine, you're mimicking the natural production of neurotransmitters inside your brain. Nicotinic acid says you're full. So it can cause a lot of issues by doing stuff like this, but it's out there. That stuff that I'm talking about too, just because we're in that same place, is called Hape. Hape or Rape. Hape snuff. Let's call it that. So it looks like this, and it's a little powder. kind of blow that in. So that is a way to do it. Great question. What happens if nicotine does not occur in your body? Nicotinic acid has to occur inside your body because it is a way that we say our body needs to eat or does not need. It's part of our biology. So that's one of the reasons why these tobacco companies have taken massive advantage of this, because since it's so addictive, it's our biological imperative to eat. So they're trying to take advantage of that to make it even more addictive. So I digress. I've gone a little bit further on that than I kind of wanted to. But it is worth something to mention about that too, that is something that you can actually make it to where it increases that. And some drugs actually will use that nicotine bind to actually get through. So no matter what, they're going to use that part of the pathway to get through. It's a useful perspective on the drugs that we're actually using. We also have other types that we will block the uptake of that as well too. So selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the SSRIs, are examples of those type of things too. So all the receptor things are blocked, and it says, hey, we're not going to actually allow any more of these type of things to come through. Is this clear as mud? Yay. Again, I'm not asking you guys to specifically memorize any of it, but it's very thought-provoking. That's kind of the perspective that we're on this. But what the big takeaway from all of this is the type of drugs that we are taking will affect how we send those neurotransmitters between the two of them. Now, this is not just happening inside your brain. This is happening anywhere that you're having any type of nerve throughout your body. So something to think about from that as well too is, why do we get other side effects with some drugs? This is a good example of why. So we have circumstances where we'll have like a sexual side effect associated with taking any of the type of mental health drugs that we have out there. So a sexual side effect would not just be the fact that I'm not able to achieve an orgasm or get an erection or achieve arousal in any type of way. That can be one of them, but it also could mean situations where difficulty urinating or difficulty of being able to defecate. Those type of things actually do occur. So it's worthy of mentioning that we have issues that happen not just inside the brain, but it happens everywhere. We can't just treat this and target one brain cell. We're treating the entire body whenever we take any of those medications. Next, we're going to go into connect that even further about the other nerves outside of the brain. So we have the nervous system. We have basically two major divisions. We have the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system primarily is the brain and spinal cord. And inside the brain, it's used for seeing things, perceiving things around us, sending out information to about different functions to happen inside the body, meaning moving arms, legs, things like that, emotion, cognition, saying, hey, heart, beat, things like that, as well as then we have the spinal cord, which then branches down from the brain to the bottom part of the body. Spinal cord stops right about L1, L2. And I'll actually, here we go. So we have right along there, this is the central nervous system. This is the peripheral nervous system. And it's where we have all those other nerves throughout the rest of our body. I would very strongly recommend, if they ever have the bodies, what's it called? Not experiment, exposition in your area, go and see it, because they'll actually show you physically. They've actually done some dissections, and you can physically see how many of the nerves that there actually truly are in the body. And it is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing to think how very, very, very detailed our central nervous system is, as well as our peripheral nervous system. But we have, in the peripheral nervous system, we have the autonomic and the somatic nervous system inside those two. So autonomic is the involuntary or automatic response that says to our organs, hey, breathe, heart, beat, things along those lines. Somatic actually helps voluntary movements. So meaning moving my arm is a somatic movement. Inside the autonomic, we have the sympathetic, which means we're going to a state of arousal. And that, again, that doesn't mean a sexual arousal. It just means that we're, it's an action, action moving up. Parasympathetic means it calms it down. I just covered those as well a second ago. So in the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, we have two different sides of this. So we have the sympathetic, where we are going to have it dilate the pupil, versus the parasympathetic to contract the pupil. So we have a either or. When we are breathing, the sympathetic nervous system tells it to relax the lung bronchi. The parasympathetic says constrict it. So pump in and out. Same thing with the heart. We've got all sorts of things as well like that too. And you'll even see too, we do have sexual elements as well too. Although it bothers me again that they did not include a female version of this because again, it's the way science tends to be. We tend to think about men, not women. But they very easily could have talked about engorgement of the clitoris or increasing of the vaginal fluids. That could be another way that they could have talked about that, but alas, they did not. In the central nervous system, we have spinal reflexes, which are very, very, very slow twitch muscles, meaning that it's not something you're going to go out there and you're going to flex your paraspinal muscles. If you're in a state of flex with the paraspinal muscles, you have a spasm going on, and you probably should see a chiropractor or a physical therapist or a medical doctor. That's something that happens with that too. But they're very, very slow to respond inside the muscles with those for a good reason. It helps keep those things stationary and balancing. This inside the central nervous system, we have these spinal reflexes, also referred to as dermatomes or somatomes. Both of those are different types of ways that we get information from different areas of the body, and it gets us information to the brain to either constrict or relax different types of muscles. Again, muscle also is things like organ. All of our organs are actually considered to be versions of muscle. All of our bone are actually considered to be muscle as well. They're called skeletal muscle, and we just refer to them differently inside the anatomy world. So let's take a moment and think about the pain withdrawal reflex. So we have a circumstance where we're going to reach out, touch a candle, or put our finger over a candle. What reaction do we have when we're feeling that heat?
We pull our hand away.
Right. Cool. And that's because we're getting a sensory receptor inside the finger that then goes through, says, hey, I'm feeling quite a lot of heat here. It will then go all the way up the arm, up through the spinal cord, and then to the brain, or just specifically in the spinal cord, depending on what we're actually feeling at that moment, and say, that's hot. You should move. It then will send back to the motor neuron, which constricts that muscle to pull it away. That's the action that ends up occurring with that whole process. So again, none of these nerves are actually physically connected to each other. This is all in milliseconds of information that's being connected between electrical chemical responses throughout the whole body. I'm guessing you guys have seen that type of thing before, right?
I'm guessing like for the people like there's people who like don't feel pain. Does that mean there's something wrong with their motor neurons or their sensory neurons?
Sensory receptors. Yep, there is a dysfunction with their sensory receptor. So yes, you are thinking like a psychologist. Yes, there is a pathology issue that is occurring to where they do not feel the same way as others. Well, here's the thing. If they're having issues with sensory receptors, do you think they might be having issues with other types of neurons, meaning inside their brain?
Yes.
Right. So likely they're going to process emotional pain or emotional actions differently as well. So I love, Aiden, that you brought that up because yes, if we have a dysfunction with one type, it's worth looking to another. So if you ever have a patient that specifically says, yeah, I just, I don't feel as much or I have a high pain tolerance, that means that likely they're going to be processing the information inside their brain differently as well, too. So not everybody is going to be textbook normal. We present textbook normal so we can say where pathology is different. That's why I'm kind of throwing all this stuff at you to say this is what textbook normal is. We have the spinal cord. Actually, I hate this. This is not regions of the spinal cord. This is regions of the spinal column. The spinal cord, like I said, actually stops officially right here, but we have additional nerves that run further throughout here too. But we have 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar, and then there are a lot of arguments in the physiology world about having the sacrum being separated. Most of the time, we just refer to it as S1 or S2, like meaning that break into 2 different sections. If you are a hardcore neurosurgeon, you will likely see it as 5 just because of the way that they're actually dealing with surgery. But it's worth stopping here for a moment because it's another great thing to kind of mention about this as well too. So let's say we get in a terrible car accident and I have somebody that gets really, really damaged and they have a break at C7 T1, a severe break to the point where the spinal cord is severed at that point. What type of dysfunction are we going to expect to happen for them at the C7 T1?
Loss of function in their hands
Okay.
and the arms.
Would they be quadriplegic?
They would not be quadriplegic. Love that. We would not be quadriplegic. At the C5 is actually where the wrist extensors are. They would likely still have access to their hand. They would have dysfunction in some of their hand, though. They may not have complete another function. They would likely have issues at their pinky and along to their elbow would be likely some issues that they would have along that area. So how about let's do another one as well too. Let's say we had a break at T7. What other type of things are we expecting to have happen there where we have a severing of the cord at T7?
Chest muscle pains?
Right? So, and it's not even pain per se. They're not going to be able to use those chest muscles. So they're not going to be able to do clavicular breathing. Their flight or fight response is actually going to be a lot more internal. So you're not going to see them go because they don't have the capability of doing that. Now, that's not the diaphragm. The diaphragm is actually up at C3, so they'll be able to actually breathe because that's something that is connected internally to make it to where they're able to breathe much more functionally. But yes, they would not be able to walk. They would have other issues associated with bowel and bladder, and likely would have to have a colostomy bag. Also have catheters inserted as well too to get the urine out and such, we can have lots and lots of issues. Now, if I were to hold for that person that had that break at T7, if I were to hold that candle up to their chest right here, what would happen? So I'm holding holding a hot poker to their chest. What would happen? Aiden, what do you got?
Would they not feel it?
They
Or
wouldn't feel
did I
it.
get
They wouldn't feel it at all. They might smell a burning sensation, but they wouldn't feel it. They could actually get a third-degree burn or worse without even feeling any tiny bit of that. So yeah, Aiden, what do you got?
this is a follow-up question to anything involved with the L to L5 region or leg muscles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because I have sciatica, so does sciatica trigger due to like one of the disc in this L and L5 region? Like, does it happen like if sciatica in the leg specifically, does that trigger because of something going wrong with the disc being like shifted in the L1 to L5 region?
I love your question. I deal with it literally every single day. Um, let's see. I'll get you a better visual for this. So, Tom's spinal image. Cool. Can you see this?
Yes.
Cool. So each one of those different lumbar nerves that are going through there, those are the ones that are working along the different regions associated with that as well too. So let's use you as an example on this. Where do you feel your sciatica? Where does it run down to? To your toes? To your calf muscle? Where do you feel it?
So my sciatica is kind of like sporadic. I had an incident where I couldn't like move or do anything for like the whole week. So I guess that was like a triggering point of my sciatica is very low. So it happens like events, like it's an event thing. It's like if you don't keep, treating it or, taking vitamins, you're gonna have another episode as he called it. So it sort of happens in the upper right of my torso, like inside of it. So yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, where you have it.
That's not really describing as much sciatica directly, meaning the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve is actually the longest nerve in the entire body. It connects basically from the sacrum all the way down to the leg on both sides. So there's two different sides of it. It can also be a tightening of the piriformis, which is a muscle that goes straight across here. But one of the things that we often ask is, where do you feel the numbness and tingling or the pain? And most people will specifically say, I'm feeling it in in the gastroc right here. Okay, so that means that we know that it's likely coming from the L3, L4-ish area. Sorry, not L3, L4, L5 area. And that's the area where we have a pathology that may have a compression between the different nerves that are coming out here in the peripheral nerves. So the connection between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, that's where we're kind of dealing with the things like the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve is, again, the longest nerve inside the peripheral nervous system. I can show you a bunch of videos and things like this as well too, specifically about that, Aiden, if you'd like to talk a little bit afterwards, okay?
Okay.
Because I would love to explain it in more detail to you. So there are some things that we have started to do because we've had situations of pathologies that have gone wrong, and since we are dealing with also the circumstance of connecting electrical chemical responses, we've done some research more recently. Actually, this one's now 20 some odd years old, where we now have inside brains of monkeys, we've started having it to where they're capable of moving a cursor and they're able to play Pong. So, and they're not touching controllers in any way, shape, or form. We have started being able to now artificially connect that pain response that we would have with the motor neurons, connecting solely inside the brain. We've done that now with human beings as well, and we're getting it out to where they're able to start using robotic arms that are implanted inside the brain. I am arguing that within my lifetime, we will have cures for complete spinal cord tears and things like that too. We are working towards that every single day with types of research like this. And it's research like this that some of your other professors are doing in psychology. It's one of the reasons why they are actually talking a lot more about having you guys do physical participation in research. It's because of stuff like this is what some of your other professors are doing. So a lot of them are doing it with mice and things like that too, but that's how we start with that. So isn't that amazing that we're actually at that point where we are able to have monkeys play Pong with just their mind? Do you know what Pong is?
It's that old-timey game where like those two bars and then like a dot bouncing between the two.
And when I was a child, it was the height of technology. Thanks for making me feel old for being old-timey. But yes, that is what it is. Cool. We're going to 2:15, right? Or 1:50. What time do we get finished today?
2:05.
2:05. Cool. So I got a little bit more time. Do you guys want to take a couple minutes break?
Yes, my eyes hurt from
Yeah.
the screen.
Cool. I'm gonna pause it and yeah, there's a lot here. I do apologize. It sucks. Yeah, I'm gonna pause the recording and then I'm gonna answer a question.
Hello.
Hello. Cool. I'm gonna give you guys, we're gonna start going a little bit into brain anatomy now. And
Professor.
yes.
Yeah, sorry. I had this question I thought of while we were at the break, and I was wondering. I heard the term neurotoxin before.
Mhm.
Can you explain what that is?
Yes, a neurotoxin is something that will interfere with neurotransmitters. That's
Oh,
literally what that type of thing is as well too. So a neurotoxin could be. Does anybody have any examples while I'm trying to think of one? Because
a snake bite?
Say again.
A bite from a snake?
Yep. So a venom could be a neurotoxin.
Okay.
Sometimes you actually would want to have a neurotoxin actually act as as something to block the pain. You could do that.
Oh,
Now, I'm
okay.
not saying that we should all go out and drink snake wine by any means, but that is something that it does exist. So some people in some cultures will use that as a natural medicine.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, snake wine is a very interestingly weird thing. I actually got a bottle of that from my sister-in-law when she went to Vietnam. And yeah. Yeah, and anesthesia can also be that. There are some arguments that there are neurotoxins in toothpaste as well. Some people, that's one of the reasons why there's an argument against what is that big thing? Fluorine. Fluorine can be considered to be a neurotoxin. So there's arguments both for and against, and depends on what political spectrum you're on, about where we should we have that in our water supply or not. So, a lot of children's toothpaste actually do not have fluoride in them. So just something worth at least thinking about from that perspective. Cool. Let's jump into some brain stuff. So we have three sections of our brain. We have the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. So in the hindbrain, we have the medulla, the reticular formation, the cerebellum, and the pons. midbrain is the tectum and tegmentum, and the forebrain has the cerebral cortex and the subcortical structures. And come on, let me have the access again. Thank you. Here is some breakdowns of that too. So the forebrain is actually in the front of the head. Midbrain is right along in here, right in the center of the head, and the hindbrain tends to be more back towards the occiput, the back of our head type of thing. So we've got some different sections of that as well too. And something that is just worthy of thinking on this too, the more forward in our brain we have, the higher the level of thought that is involved with it. And when we have things like the hindbrain, those are natural responses that happen inside the body, like breathing, heart beating, stuff like that too, just things that are part of our autonomic and our sympathetic nervous system. That's where most things are controlled inside of that. We have some subcortical structures, the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The thalamus relays and filters information from senses and transmits things to the cerebral cortex. It's part of our limbic system. And the hypothalamus regulates our body temperature, so thus it's more in that natural part of it. Hunger, thirst, sexual behavior, also part of the limbic system. Again, this is one of those big places where nicotinic acid is occurring pretty darn frequently. We have the thalamus to thank for how we enjoy an apple. Now think about it when you're just taking a bite into that big, beautiful red apple. You feel its smoothness in your hand. You hear the crunch. You taste its sweetness. You've got that really smooth sensation on the outside, and it almost just gives you like it releases oxytocin because of how good it feels to go through that. Now, again, a Red Delicious is not a very tasty apple per se, but it's that sensation of all of that information being taken in, and we are taking in all that except smell by the thalamus. Kind of cool, right? The limbic system is a pretty important one. It's a group of the four brain structures that involves with motion, emotion, learning, and memory. So again, as part of that regulating body temperature, but also we want to get it to where we just naturally will react and respond to a lot of these perspectives. A big one of this too is the amygdala. It's also referred to as the lizard brain, and it plays a lot of parts in our base emotions. That's one of the reasons why it's kind of referred to as a lizard, kind of from an evolutionary perspective. So emotions like anger and such are felt in those specific areas. In the basal ganglia, it's another subcortical structure. It directs intentional movements and plays a role in our reward processing. So meaning that, oh, I deserve a cookie concept. But it's more than just about the fact that, oh, I deserve a cookie. That reward process inside of our brain can sometimes be very, very screwed up. And this happens a lot when we're taking things like drugs, just in general. So the first time that we have take a drug, my gosh, it is life-changing. I mean, think about it. First time somebody takes methamphetamines, they have so much amazing of an experience that they're like, oh my gosh, I want to do this again. Well, great. So the next time they do methamphetamines, it's not exactly as high as the last time, but it still feels pretty darn great. The next time after that, it's a little bit less. Eventually, it gets to the point where it is just doing a drug like that to function, to be able to feel like it just is somewhat considered to be normal. So we can interrupt that reward cascade in the brain, and we will go into massive, massive detail about this when we're dealing with addiction, and we're talking about this in later areas. So if you're interested in or you're having any issues associated with addiction, it might be worth starting to look to see what actually happens with the basal ganglia involved with your own life. See how that actually works. It's right by the thalamus and the hypothalamus. We've been looking a lot at using fMRIs associated with social media. Now, especially associated with Instagram and Facebook. They have made it to where it's available, and it's possible to find this inside of Facebook and Instagram, where you can say hide likes. Why do you think they make it very, very, very difficult to find those buttons and those capabilities of turning those off on those websites?
I don't know.
Well, one of the big points that Instagram and Facebook want you to do is they want you to be in that software and not be able to get out of it. They want you to stay in there and just keep doom scrolling and connect. I mean, that's why we have these algorithms that when we watch something for a couple seconds and we just stay on that screen, they want to give us more of the same thing. Yep, their model, it works completely on dopamine addiction. Evan, you were perfectly right about that. So part of that too is that it's based off of research that was done to show that we could hide those like accounts, but it would actually make it to where people would be less engaged. Well, yeah, they want to still give people the capability of doing so, but man, do they not want to. Now, let's connect this a little bit more too. It starts talking too about victimization among adolescents who experience victimization at school. How does that connect with the likes and dislikes perspective on the reward cascade inside the brain? Thoughts?
No.
Okay. Well, basically, the long and short is that we also will have circumstances to where a victim will actually sometimes look for any type of attention because they're used to getting some type of attention inside their brain, and they're wanting to have to fulfill that that need inside the cortex, and thus they can sometimes actually make it to where they will further victimize themselves in order to get more attention like that. It's not something that I'm specifically saying that people are doing purposely, but it is something that pathologically we do have circumstances like this, and we will go into this in more detail in the childhood development area. So I had mentioned earlier about hormones associated with the endocrine system. Things are very directly connected with neurotransmitters and hormones. Hormones give information about telling things to grow, have our metabolism, deal with sexual maturity. It directly is associated with the adrenals, the pancreas, the pineal gland. So if we mess with one hormone, we also mess with neurotransmitters. The pituitary gland is actually the master gland of the body's hormone production, and it controls stress. So stress is actually a really big thing that we deal with in psychology, and it directly can connect with how we produce digestive hormones. So we can have issues where we have stress, we then start having people gaining massive amounts of weight or losing massive amounts of weight. And that directly connects to how we think inside of our brain. Stress also associates with reproductive processes. We're having a lot of issues with fertility just in general in our society. There's arguments too that post-COVID, we're going to have even more issues. And a lot of that has to do with it being in a stress state, as well as being biologically stressed off of having COVID or vaccines. Yes, this does include having hormonal issues. So something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, can directly affect stress, which thus can affect emotions like anger. Somebody that has PCOS very frequently has things like roid rage. You're getting steroid rage throughout your body because hormones are steroids. Body's natural steroids. Isn't this kind of cool?
Yes.
Yeah. So thyroid gland connects, the pineal gland is actually inside the brain, right here, right next to the hypothalamus. Pituitary gland is right here in the front. So again, it's part of the brain. All of these things all will connect through the pineal gland and the pituitary gland. They will, almost any hormone that we are dealing with will go through that. So in the cerebral cortex, we have 4 different sections, and this is where we're starting to get a lot more into the higher thought perspective of the brain. So not just the beating of the heart, things like that. We are dealing with the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe. Actually, I'm going to minimize this and get that pointer again. Pointer. Frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. We have fissures going through little holes through all of those things. They'll connect all the way through compared to the sucri, which is the ones that the folds that don't go all the way through, just in a section. And the gyri are the big meat-like structures in between them. We have a left and right hemisphere to our brain. Yes, Aiden.
When did we like discover the lobes or name them as the lobes? Was that more recent? Because I know like some philosophers were like back in like BCE, they were already looking at the brain and taking it apart.
That's when we actually started looking at the brain. We started naming it a lot more in the Renaissance era. That's about the time that we started actually looking at the brain and starting to name some of these things. However, we didn't get some great ideas about what each section functioned as. I'm hoping to get today to my buddy Gage. We're going to talk about him in a couple minutes. But yes, that great question on that. So we have a left and right side of our brain. They are ultimately mimicking each other on either side. On one side, there is actually a little bit more of spatial reasoning. The other tends to be a lot more math processing as well. Oh, we have about 1 minute. Dang it. Okay. I will see you. Evan, I love you, man. I appreciate you for keeping me honest. We're going to stop with the left and right brain, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Sound good?
Yes.
Cool. We're going to get some
Bye,
holes in heads
Professor.
tomorrow. Like literally, you're going to hear about a guy that got a hole in his head. No homework. It was just to read for these 2 lectures. So go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. And I'm